You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am Urza Master. With me as always is Lord Uther, and today joining us is Coach Norman Dale. Welcome, fellas.
My team's on the floor.
And this is an God, how do I follow that?
Hoosiers. Yeah, that's right.
This is another special episode dedicated to Star Trek Picard, the current and best Star Trek iteration out there. Right now, showing Season 3, Episode 2 is live. I know at least two of us have seen it so far, and Coach is catching up with us. Today we're going to talk the remainder of Season 1 we didn't touch on last time, and tease a little bit of Season 2. And then we're hoping our next episode will finish out Season 2 and really dive headfirst into Season 3, which I will say that Season 2 so far is my favorite. Not to say that I'm not loving Season 3, because I am. But Season 1 was really that... I think of it as like the first apple in the orchard. You bite into it, it's crisp, it's juicy, it's sweet, but it really leaves you wanting more. And I feel like with Season 2, as we'll get to later in the show, that's more of your mid-season apple. You're used to apples, but this one is just, that's like the perfect apple. And of course, I think Season 3 is going to be your late season, just before winter apple. It's cold, you bite into it, but it's still got everything that tastes of summer, and it's that last blast. Like we talked last time, this may be the final voyage of the TNG crew. So let's pick up around where we left off. And I'm going to kick it over to Coach, who's going to give us some background and give us a little bit of setup here, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. This episode brought to you by Washington Apples. Crisp, delicious. Find them in your local grocery store. Okay, so we are going to finish with Picard Season 1. The first half of Season 1 kind of set all the players on the chessboard, introduced us to Picard's new shipmates and crew, some of which were delightful, others had to grow on you a little. We ended with a cliffhanger in which Dr. Agnes Girardi had murdered her mentor and one-time lover, Bruce Maddox, without a whole lot of explanation. And so we, the viewer, were sort of saying, wait a minute, we've been rooting for this plucky and endearing doctor of synthetic humanoids. Why all of a sudden is she committing homicide? Anyways, the rest of the season takes this mismatched crew and sends them on a journey to save synthetic life from the dastardly Romulans who are hell-bent on wiping them out. And then it throws us into a late tizzy when the synthetics said, enough's enough. We're just going to summon ultra-dimensional beings through subspace and have them wipe out the galaxy so that we can be the most advanced life form. And this is classic Trek in terms of, the overall approach. What is the big moral, existential, theological question we're wrestling with here, which is the right to exist for synthetic life versus the organics who created them. I mean, this can go all the way back to the God questions posed by the original series and the motion picture and the Final Frontier, and it's fertile ground for Star Trek. It's something that Star Trek has always done very well with, the wrestling, of sort of two sides where you can kind of see the arguments pro and con. no pun intended there.
Hey.
But
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, go ahead.
But the thing about this viewer was that it kind of came a little late to the conversation in terms of this theme has been explored now, going back to 2017 with Blade Runner 2049 and the original Blade Runner 1982, Ridley Scott classic. I may be in the minority, but I enjoyed HBO's Westworld for the 4 seasons that it was on. Also sort of tackled this question, the idea of, is a synthetic artificial life form, are they as much a person or have the right to exist as, again, the human creators who enabled them? And quite honestly, if you're looking at the news now, we're kind of wrestling with that as we start to get these AI chatbots you've seen in the news where they're starting to interact with users, and depending on how the questions that you pose to the chatbot are framed, you might start to get some dark, interesting responses. I believe I just read recently that one of them even tried to convince the questioner to leave his wife and be with the chatbot. So this is not a brand new theme. Go ahead.
You can do what I did. Sorry, I can't help it. I have to interrupt you real quick because
Go ahead.
I had it write me the final episode of Twin Peaks.
Oh, nice.
And it actually referenced Truman and even Josie Packard at one point and Laura Palmer. So it's very interesting. I don't even know why I'm bringing that up. Oh, because we're Twin Peaks guys too. That's why.
Absolutely.
But the idea, but
and it was probably 30% more linear than a Lynch episode. But
yes, that is also true. But just that idea of AI and what it can do, I think you're right. I didn't mean to interrupt you again. I apologize,
No.
It makes you ponder what we could be heading into, kind of like with what they were going through in Picard. Okay, and go.
So like I say, for me, there's an air of the familiar as we do this story, but I'm glad to see this story tackled in a Trek context. And I think that, this is the kind of storytelling that Gene Roddenberry, envisioned well back, when the series first premiered in '66, I believe. This is the kind of age-old question, wrestling with what is man's place in the universe, and dare he go too far? So they went there. The solution is satisfying in a Saturday morning serial type of way. The otherworldly synthetics are fought back. We get a tremendous appearance by Will Riker. Now, earlier in the second half of season 1, we've actually caught up with the Rikers. They're living in a remote wooded area, making wood-fired pizza with their precocious daughter. And it was wonderful. The episode itself is kind of a slow down the plot and just sort of revel in the good vibes feel of some Next Generation cast members getting to reunite for the first time on camera in 20 years. And I'm totally okay with that. And I could have watched 6 more episodes just like that of Will Riker cooking pizza with extra tomatoes burnt because he wasn't paying attention to the wood-fired oven. So, and let it be known that in some lifetime, perhaps not this one, I will get a wood-fired pizza oven and utilize it to the best of my ability. And so, that kind of brings us to another point worth mentioning here. This was season 1 of this show. Now, we all know that they went ahead and made additional seasons, and we're going to be talking about it. But I wanted to try a little thought experiment before we get into the big climactic revelations at the end of this season. For Next Generation fans, for people who had been with the show back from 1987 through the movies and beyond, who felt like Nemesis was not the send-off that in their hearts and minds that they thought they deserved or the creators deserved. What if season 1 of Picard had stopped at season 1? That is to say that it was a limited miniseries Patrick Stewart and the cast said, yeah, we'll do this for 10 episodes and then, leave us alone. We want to go do Shakespeare on stage or whatever. Would fans, would you, Ursa Master, or you, Lord Uther, would you have been okay with what they gave us strictly in season 1? That is to say, we've seen glimpses of Data and an answer to the question of B4. And we've seen the Rikers at home, and we get a fantastic Riker leading the fleet against 218, I remember the number, Romulan warbirds. And we get 7 of 9, crossing over from Voyager and so forth. So we get little glimpses of the Next Generation crew. We don't see the full complement, obviously. But we have enough to be able to say now, to recontextualize Nemesis and to say, like, okay, so that wasn't the last word in Trek for this crew. Now we know that the Rikers, were happily married and had kids. One of them, passed tragically, tying back into the synthetic storyline. Would it have been enough for you to say, okay, the bad taste of Nemesis that it left in my mouth, I'm okay with. I'm at peace with these characters and where they ended up. I turn it over to whoever wants to take that ball.
Go ahead, my friend.
All right, I will, as usual, take the baton here because I have a lot to say. Having seen season 2, I would say I would have felt incomplete. Now, before seeing season 2, I would have been really stoked to get what we got. I think it was a beautiful tie-up of Nemesis and kind of some of the loose ends. There would always be room, and I think the best shows do this, there would always be room for more, which leaves, room for comics, books, fan fictions even. Some fan fiction's really compelling. I've read quite a bit of really good stuff, and a lot of dirty stuff that really isn't any good at all. If I'm being fair, I think we've got a great lead-in to a new Next Generation after season 1. I think if they'd have left it there and then introduced a Titan series with Will Riker as captain, that would have been very satisfying. I would have felt really good about that. Plus, then you get all those future cameos. You get your Geordies, you get your Worfs, you get your, Will Wheatons. We could work with that. There was a lot left on the table, but not so much that you felt like it was undone. And that's where, I have to say season 1 really put a nice cherry on top because I think it was left with a bit of a what if. It was kind of like when the Eagles first came back. Are people going to show up to our live shows? And look what happened there. They've been touring since '94. So to me, it's a little bit like that where do people still have interest in this? And I think despite the fact that season 1 went off so well, they felt that way about season 2. Are people still going to be into this? Are they still going to follow this story with as much passion and with as much, renown as is deserving of the TNG crew and the amount of effort, these old farts have to put into acting these days? Because it's a lot, it's a lot for a young person, let alone when you're in your 80s, to get on the soundstage and act this out even in front of a green screen. So I think with season 3, they knew it's going to be a banger, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing, but they probably still feel a little bit like, is there going to be enough interest? And if there is, what if? And that's where, let's tie this into modern time. Patrick Stewart has already said, there's doors left open. As with any good Trek, any good television series, you got to end with some loose ends. Hell, even Gilmore Girls left enough loose ends to make a pretty successful follow-up, which I watched. Huge Lauren Graham fan. And anyway, I'll turn it over to Lord Uther for his thoughts.
First of all, Coach, you realize that you look like a lieutenant from one of the seasons there with your yellow top. Oh, it's a San Francisco sweatshirt, but I like the black underneath. Look great.
Thank you.
Anytime. No, I would not have been okay with it ending at the end of season 1 because I was still missing a few of my favorites that were there. I still wanted to see the Enterprise. I still wanted some of those. I wanted them to be back on it, right? I still wanted some of those things.
Right.
I think it was very evident, though you're not to season 2 yet, but I think it's very evident in season 2 that they were going to have a season 3. Do you know, like it? I feel like season 2 is a bridge to 3 in a sense, while also having one of Urza Master's favorite characters ever in season 2. So I think, yes, I would have been happy with it. No, I would not have been satisfied with it. I think that's where I'm kind of going with it.
Right.
And then, like I said, season 2, very evident that they were going for a season 3.
And I'll tease that a little when we start talking season 2 later
please.
on. So, okay, we're going to reveal some spoilers here because we are. If you haven't seen these Picards season 1, this might be a good time to go to the fridge. But we are going to now kind of spoil the ending a little bit of this season because you can't really not talk about the season without talking about the ending. Jean-Luc Picard, c'est mourir, and Lieutenant Commander Data, also c'est fini. We get here at the very end, following the synthetic revolution that is put down, we get the deaths of both Captain Picard, Admiral Picard, and Data. And we were talking about this in Generations, and we were talking about this in Nemesis. For me, this viewer, this was the first time for me that Star Trek absolutely nailed the death scenes. The final episode was written by Michael Chabon. We talked about him last week, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author. He was the showrunner for most of season 1, and I think of the 10 episodes, he either co-wrote or wrote at least 6 of them. So he was a pretty strong voice in the writer's room as far as how the show was presented. He also liked to have the supporting characters use the word fuck. If you look up his episodes, that was a Chabon thing. But anyways, he wrote the finale, episode 10, and so he got to craft these death sequences, and we'll take them one at a time. We'll start with Jean-Luc, who it is revealed to us early in the season that he is not just a man of 94 as they age him in the show, but he's got some mileage, and he's got terminal brain hemorrhage. And so they tell him, don't go back out into space, Jean-Luc. He says, Pshaw. I'm going to save the Federation and this beautiful synthetic girl, Soji. And so, of course, it catches up to him after he saves the day. He gets to pilot a starship for the first time in forever. He's actually at the controls, not telling the helmsman to engage in this and make that so. He's actually the one steering, which is cool. But he does pass, and much like the search for Spock, the writers have conveniently built in a device that allows him to continue on. But I think it's worth mentioning that even though his consciousness is then transferred to a synthetic body, making him, in fact, basically a synth, retaining all of Picard's neural memories and life experiences, a fact of which that at least early in season 2 they only make sort of passing reference to. If you didn't know any better, you'd think it was just good old Jean-Luc. But the Jean-Luc Picard we were introduced to in 1987 at the encounter at Farpoint, who first went toe-to-toe with the Q Continuum and John Delancey, more of him in a minute. He's dead. He's gone. Jean-Luc, he's dead, Jim. So I guess I wanted to talk briefly about, with you guys, with Ursa Master and Lord Uther, sort of what was peak Picard, right? Because we've seen him kind of in 3 different evolutions as these characters have moved on. From 87 to 94, he was showing up every week for 22 weeks on television. And when we first saw him in 87, in his jumpsuit. It's like, hey, it's that guy from Excalibur. Or Dune, David Lynch's Dune. But I mean, here's a Royal Shakespearean actor, the exact opposite of William Shatner, I might add, commanding a brand new Enterprise. So was that run of the series, as he evolved from 87 to 94, was that your favorite iteration of Picard? Was it the ones we got in the features, in which we now had sort of an older, wiser, but still willing to swing a phaser rifle into a Borg's head and wrestle with Soren in the Valley of the Sun in 110-degree weather? You know, was that Picard at that point sort of like the summit of the mountaintop in terms of Patrick Stewart? I'm not just talking about how cool as a character, but I mean in terms of Patrick Stewart's command of that character and being able to express himself as an actor, as a character, etc. And now we have this third iteration, one that I had trouble wrapping my hands around early because he was frail and vulnerable and clearly, you know, in his 80s in the show, you know, mid-90s. This Picard has to use his wits. He has to, you know, he's much more, has to use the diplomatic measures. He's not soft-spoken. He still is, you know, rigid, and he's still got that fire in him. But he's clearly physically weakened, you know, to that point. So I guess I'm throwing it out to you guys. What was your sort of peak Picard? What was your favorite iteration of this character, you know, going all the way back, you know, per se? And I'm not saying cite a specific episode or something like that, but just where do you think he was your favorite version of this character now that he's gone?
I mean, that's a tough question. That's like the old, do I like Kirk or do I like Picard? Well, I like both. And I think it's very poignant to say that there are three phases of Picard. You have TNG Picard, you have the films Picard, and now you have Picard. And they're very different. I mean, I think none of them are static either. That's the real challenging part. Is Picard 87 to Picard 94 changes a lot. So even within like just TNG, you have several variations of Picard. Picard who doesn't like kids to Picard who seems to like kids. I think if I had to choose, I'd have to pick more than one best, but I could probably give you a top 5, top 7, more than like. But my number one, which I hope we get to delve into in one of our episodes, the top 7 iterations of Picard in more detail. But my number one is probably First Contact Picard. I think he's at his most brilliant performance, Patrick Stewart. I think he's wrestling with his biggest issues, bigger than even the ones I think they tackle in Picard. And I say that having watched every episode thus far. And yeah, I think even with season 3, episode 2's bombshell information, which really didn't go off like a bombshell, I think even that, you know, pales in comparison to him facing down his time as Locutus. Because nothing changed his character quite so much as being Borg. And I think just seeing that inner struggle play out on the grand scale of the Enterprise and not blowing up the ship, not drawing a hard line, but finding a way to do all those things without compromising his principles, without compromising the Enterprise, without risking the lives of his crew unnecessarily. I mean, standing, you know, toe to toe with Worf and fighting Borg on the hull of the ship in magnetic boots. I mean, hell, that was such an action-packed movie. He didn't have some goofy love interest. You know, we did get that later. You know, they didn't try to pigeonhole him, but they also didn't try to like funnel in too much, like painting a picture of who this Picard man is. He just was, and to me that is why it's the penultimate performance in my mind, is that he got to exist in the space of Picard, in the moment which is most poignant to Picard's legacy, and he triumphed, which is a basic fundamental of Picard. He always overcomes his circumstances, except his brain thing, which even that, after becoming a synth, I think Picard is still very same Picard. He develops in very awesome ways, but that's a great question.
Well, first of all of our fans down below in the comments, what's your favorite Picard? Is it during the seasons, movies, or the TV series? I would say the movies Picard is it because I think the one thing that Patrick Stewart has done in general is he has embraced that he's Jean-Luc Picard. Where I think when you look at the original series cast at times, they didn't always embrace being original, like being Spock or being known as Kirk. I don't think they all embraced that. Even McCoy, why am I drawing up? Oh, DeForest Kelley. You know, I think he was actually he was a Western, what, right, Aaron? I'm sorry, Coach. He was like a TV actor from the spaghetti Western type of days on TV, right? Sure. So I think they all kind of had their issues, where I think the one thing the Next Gen has done is they embrace themselves as the characters, and I think you really see that. Even now in Picard, I think they're reveling actually in getting to play the characters again. At least watching episode 2, that was a feeling that I was getting. So I would say, movie Picard, definitely. Which, don't let me forget to bring up. I can hold off on it. All right, go ahead.
And I think that's an interesting. Both of you, I mean, again, sort of gravitating towards there in the film side. That's interesting because, as a writer, you would think, oh well, you know, you get more development in TV, you get longer time to spend with the characters, ergo. But I think that because of his acting training, and the fact that even in those films we mentioned, you know, brief bits in Dune and Excalibur, you couldn't take your eyes off Patrick Stewart. He's big enough to fill the frame. He's big enough to command the stage. I mean, this man does a one-man Christmas Carol show. So when it came time to put him up on 70mm Dolby Stereo, he didn't shrink. He just filled out the stage with his presence, his authority, his gravitas. So I think that's an interesting observation that you guys have, that it's almost like this character, we grew up with him on the small screen, but he was born to, you know, sort of shine there in larger than life proportions. So okay, so you know, Picard lives, but before he gets to have a second bite at the apple, again, this episode brought to you by that same fruit, he has to have another dream sequence, if you will, with Data. Now, we were teased that in the first couple of shows in the first season, in the first part of the season. Brett Spiner, you know, put the makeup on.
Section 31 has taken him away again.
Oh, no.
A very important mission.
Oh, no, what?
Well, I will say this, where Coach was headed was the dream sequence with Data at the end of the season 1, which... I mean, if the death of Picard wasn't already emotional enough, then we have to deal with Data saying, this is torture. Please end my existence. Let me die. And it's sad, of course, but it's also kind of beautiful, because I think Brent Spiner knew, look, I'm not going to be able to be Data anymore. I can do other characters. I don't even look like Data. And Data really doesn't look like Data either. So I think it was wonderfully done. It was very tasteful. And, you know, this series has not shied away from, as Roddenberry Pictures never did, never shies away from, you know, very, very poignant current events. And I think, you know, being in charge of one's death is one of those. And that was something that really shined through with this Data sequence, is that, you know, Data hasn't had a choice in this matter. You know, there's no bringing him back at this point. They can't do that, but they can give him a peaceful end. And there's no need to let him suffer in this dreamland anymore. And I think it was just a very wise choice. I think there were still very interesting things they were going to do with Brent Spiner, which of course we'll see coming up. And I still believe that this season 3, we're going to get more Brent Spiner in many more fun ways.
Yes. Yes, Gary.
I mean, I have to admit, I was emotional. The last episode of this season was tough. I mean, for I think a fan who's like literally cradle to now, been with these characters, I get a little sad anytime a show ends. But when you really connect with a character, like I think Data he's all of us, right? He's this childlike entity that's discovering strange new things. He's the discovery portion, the explorer portion of TNG, which isn't always there. So I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant creative choice. And I knew it had to be done in some way, shape, or form. I didn't expect it this way, and it worked for me.
Kind of like I echo everything that you say. I mean, how do I follow that? I think it also, like you said, the idea of sometimes people are just ready, right? I mean, they're ready to move on to whatever is next, obviously, with Data saying, basically terminate me, in a sense. I think it does kind of bring up some of those philosophical questions or thoughts about, is it ethical? What happens afterwards? I think a lot of that kind of gets stirred up with that.
And I think for the fan base, because the self-sacrifice in Nemesis, I mean, it sort of pays that off, right? And like I say, I don't think I'll ever be able to watch Nemesis again. We talked about it just recently. I don't think I'll ever be able to watch it again now in the same way, because now I know that they've moved. There was a wall, right? Like the movies ended, and for 20 years or so, they didn't really do anything with those characters unless you were reading tie-in novels and comic books and the like, of which there were alternate versions of this, scripted out. But here now, you can go back and watch Nemesis and know, okay, this isn't the last we're going to see of Data, and this isn't his isn't his death scene, if you will. His sacrifice will lead to something else, something more. And so I think, in that respect, tying up that bow nicely, I think was a real gift to fans there, including tying in some Irving Berlin, albeit covered by some modern torch singer, as opposed to letting Brent Spiner himself give it a whirl. Okay, so just to sort of put our thing on the end of season 1, the synths have been saved. The Federation has reversed their synth ban, allowing them to not only exist but travel amongst the Federation, and thank God, because now Picard is one of them. I just want to get real quick, this is like microburst opinions. Again, you've got to kind of narrow your focus here to season 1. I know that you guys have seen these characters possibly in future episodes, so it's probably a little unfair knowing what you may know that some of us don't, but your impressions of these characters, we're just going to do a quick lightning round here of these characters in the first season that they brought us. I want to give a particular shout out to Narissa, who was played by actress Peyton List. She was the evil Romulan sister who drove much of the action in this show. She actually, she and Harry Treadaway played the Romulan siblings who were, at the heart of all this. There was some suggestions that they were, as close as brother and sister, perhaps even more. But her role was greatly expanded. Little backstory. She nailed him in the audition, and then the writer said, shit, we better do more with her. So she went from being a bit player, from maybe a walk-on in one episode, to basically being the face of the villainry throughout. So I want to give a special credit to her. She did decent fight scenes with 7 of 9, and her fate, ultimately, she got what was coming to her. So, but real quick, Lord Uther, Agnes Girardi, or did you like the character?
Oh,
or were you
yes.
kind of
So I'm gonna do either beam him up,
okay?
which means I like him, or
Okay.
photon torpedoes.
Okay.
'Cause I can't stand
Again,
them.
season 1 now. Okay.
Season, yeah, I know I'm a little jaded here. I have to
Right.
beam her up.
Okay. Ursa Master.
Beam her up.
Okay.
I want an Agnes tattoo.
All right. Very good. Rafi, Picard's former number 1 there.
Well, see, I can't think of. Photon torpedoes.
Okay.
I'm going to beam her up.
Okay. Elnor, his Romulan, raised by war nuns, apprentice. Legolas.
Beam her up.
Ursa Master.
I'll beam him up as well.
Okay. She played like 5 roles, so it's difficult, but we'll go with the one where she had the most screen time. Soji.
Beam her up.
Beam her up.
Right to my living room. So, okay. Captain Chris Rios and all of his EMFs and EMPs and holograms and the like.
Beam him up.
I'm going to photon torpedo Rios.
He
Okay.
grew on me.
Okay, hold that
Maybe that's
thought.
a season 2 thing.
And his Romulan housekeeper, who we're about to talk about in a much different context, Laris.
Beam her up.
Beam her up. I liked Laris a lot in season 1.
Okay, yes, no, and it's an Irish actress, Orla Brady, and it's always nice to hear that lilt. So, and then season 1, I mean that's kind of come to a close, and so what happened was, of course, a global pandemic, and that kind of put the brakes on things. So Lord Uther was obviously paying attention during those conference calls, because what they ended up doing, because they were so delayed by production delays due to health, they decided to write and shoot seasons 2 or 3 pretty close to back, just kind of make up for lost ground, but at the same time knowing what story they were planning on telling. So your instincts were dead on there, Uther. That's exactly what when they were doing season 2, they already had in mind exactly the direction they wanted to go for season 3. Now, Michael Chabon, we just gave him praise for being the Pulitzer Prize winning author who ran a TV show for the first time. CBS loved his work and then promptly said, okay, now you have to do other things. So he left the show as a showrunner. He's still a creator. And he was still involved in the very early development for season 2 writing, but basically he was no longer a creative force for season 2 and then season 3. They moved him over. They moved him over to Strange New Worlds. I believe.
Wonderful.
I believe he's got a voice on there now. I'm not sure how much he's done of the scripting yet. That's a whole different podcast there. But they brought in a guy named Terry Matalas, Matalas, and he became the co-showrunner with Akiva Goldsman, and those two kind of ran the shows together. And then about halfway through season 2, Terry went on to do season 3, so everything you're enjoying right now in season 3 is coming from his voice primarily. He was the showrunner and creator of Sci-Fi's 12 Monkeys, which ran for about 4 seasons on that network, an adaptation of the 95 Bruce Willis picture. He oversaw the final season of CBS's MacGyver.
Well, that says everything right there. I don't need to hear any more.
The remake of MacGyver. And when CBS realized they weren't going to continue with that show and canceled it, they immediately moved him over to Picard, because that was, in their estimation, a much higher profile. So it was almost like a reward. Yeah, we're canceling your show, but you can come co-run season 2. And if you look at the writing credits for season 2 and presumably some of season 3, if not most of it, Terry Matalas is one of those, singular voices there. And he and Akiva Goldsman sort of helped launch this this season, get it off the ground and running. And then we start to see some new staff writers we'll talk about next episode about what they were able to contribute. So, he also worked on Nikita, which was a well-received show either on USA or the CW. I don't remember which one, but Nikita.
I think it was USA.
He had a hand in that as well. So they were the co-showrunners. And so, season 2. We talked about how they had sort of a 3-year plan and a 5-year plan. Well, the 3-year plan, the first season, was always about redemption. Picard atoning for the sins of Starfleet past and making things right. Well, season 2 is resurrection, which can be taken in multiple number of ways, not the least of which is that Picard is now a synthetic golem, and yet still has trouble, at least in the first couple of episodes, navigating the treacherous roadmap that is the human heart. And it's a little on the nose, but it's also, again, another place that you can kind of get the shovel out and dig into. The idea that Picard has forsaken personal ties and romantic longevity for the sake of, being the most excellent starship captain / admiral / chancellor of Starfleet Academy that he could be. And so right away from the jump in this second season, we're introduced with this idea that his housekeeper at the Chateau Picard, Laris, her Romulan mate has passed on off screen, contract negotiations, I'm told, but in all there. He's no longer in the picture. And as she says, in that sly older woman voice, he was my mate for life. And now that he's gone, we're expected to move on and mate even harder like this next time. And poor Picard's just sipping. He's just sipping some of his delicious vintage, just saying, what am I supposed to do here?
Section 31 again takes him away.
I don't want to hear the coach talking about Picard possibly laying the pipe with the Romulan. I see. I mean, season 2. Where do you even begin? I mean, you have to begin with the obvious, but it's set up in such an odd way that I don't think I saw exactly where they were going with this, and that's I think the most beautiful thing about season 2, and that's why it's my favorite thus far. Is I really did not know where the series was going to go. I mean, it's like, okay, they're setting her up as a love interest. How are they going to work that together? I was like, are they going to go on some kind of a mission together, get involved? And then they're working in some angles that's like, wait a minute. Finally, we get the character I've been asking for in every single episode, every single movie, everything that's come out since the close of the original TNG, where the F is Q. And here he is. In all his glory, he even changes his appearance to match Picard's elderly age, which I thought was a brilliant touch. I loved it. But right off the bat, I mean, immediately, something is afoot. Something is clearly up with Q. He is way meaner and way more, vindictive, it seems, than ever before. And it's like, well, okay, sometimes Q's come across as kind of a jerk, but he's never really been mean, per se. Because I went back and rewatched the whole series in between season 1 and season 2. And from Farpoint to the very last episode, All Good Things, at no point am I like, geez, this Q's a jerk. No, he's always just kind of cheeky and pucky. He's omniscient, but,
right.
He's just a puck. And I think I didn't know how they were going to character develop Q any farther, and suddenly they did. And it's like, oh my God, brilliant. Now, how they rope in the rest of season 1's cast and crew, to me, was like, wow. I mean, this is a convenient setup, but I'm like, maybe they just had to work with these folks because of the pandemic. And then we get smacked with a lot Like, it's very front-loaded, this second season. Like
Yes, I agree with that 100%.
You are thrust into as all things with Q are. You know, this is stupid cameras. Really.
I feel like you're giving me a sobriety test every time you do that. Like, just walk towards me.
But I don't want to get too deep, but it's just like what you didn't get with season 1 with all the exposition up front, you really get in season 2. Like, they know they're jam-packing this season with a ton of information because it's tackling probably the most dark recesses of Picard and of Q and of humanity because the trial is ending, or so Q seems to allude to. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts because season 2, again, my favorite season so far.
Well, I'm going to let Coach go because, again, I can't remember how far in he is season-wise. So go ahead there, Coach.
Oh, well, like I said, sorry that Deep Space 12 needed me there for a minute. But John Delancey, he's been here since '87, the very first episode. He was a Days of Our Lives regular, which is actually where I knew him from when I, first saw him on that pilot episode. Just a criminally underused element of Star Trek. I mean, he should have been a cast regular. He should have been popping in every week, but then we would have got tired of him, I know. But right away, when they've de-aged him, and he's right there looking like we remember him, and for some weird sort of like self-conscious reason, everyone in the beginning of season 2 has to comment on how they're older or thicker or what have you, because Q alters his appearance when Picard goes and visits Guinan, which is a nice cameo, again laying on the relationship side of Picard a little thick. Even Guinan says, like, well, we Elorians, we don't age like you humans, but I've tried to keep up. And so a reference that Whoopi Goldberg is no longer the Whoopi Goldberg you remember from Fatal Beauty, Jumping Jack Flash, and Ghost. So, I mean, it's kind of weird that they had to feel the need to
and
comment
Sister
on
Act
it.
2.
And Sister Act 2, Back in the Habit. It's weird that they felt they had to write in, like, the explanation, like, well, don't mind me, I'm fat. But in any event, it's still nice to see them together on screen again there. I don't think it will surprise you, and again, I'm still very early into season 2, and we're going to discuss most of what happens in the next episode. But I don't think it would surprise you if I told you, gentlemen, and our viewers, that one of Terry Metsalis's favorite films as a child, trilogies as a child, was Back to the Future. And if you look at these first 2 episodes, especially the second episode, we're basically in Back to the Future 2, in which our crew finds themselves in an alternate hellish timeline, Bifco, and says, my God, the Federation's the Confederation. We are exterminating whole species. Climate change has wrecked the planet. I mean, it's a nightmare. And we have to go back in time and fix it, a la Doc Brown and Marty having to, where did they screw up the timeline in the past, and how do we get back? So I'm not spoiling anything by saying that those influences are definitely felt. They allude to and reference the Voyage Home's means of getting back.
I love that. They're talking about
I'm going to
having
suspect.
Spock, yeah.
Right. I'm going to suspect. They had a Spock. I'm going to suspect that something similar is in the works, and we'll see how that plays out next week. And I'll spoil early, in case the Back to the Future allusions were too subtle. The director of episodes 3 and 4, which will send them back to the past, are none other than Lorraine McFly. Leia Thompson will be the director. That Leia Thompson. Also, comely young star of Jaws 3D. But anyway, she sits behind the director's chair for episodes 3 and 4, and then passes the baton to our very own Jonathan Frakes for episodes 5 and 6. We'll get into all that next week. So yes, the Back to the Future runs high, minus the DeLorean. But I mean, it's sort of fun Right? I mean, because you've got, again, it's, in the mirror universe kind of way, in the dark, undersides. Picard is now a genocidal, he's got slaves in the house, in the vineyard. All he has to do is growl at somebody like the way we love him, and everyone just snaps to attention. And he, even as an actor, he takes on a more rigid pose. So it's fun to play, it's fun to play that, obviously, as an actor. Seven of Nine is back and no longer has Borg implants, and she's actually the president of this confederation. So it's kind of fun. It was actually exactly.
Yeah.
It was actually fun to see Rios, and I know we've photoned him. It was actually fun to see him commanding the Stargazer, which I don't remember what it looked like in the Next Generation when they were touching upon Picard's first command. Apparently, this is a new model or a new look at the ship, but it still has the 4 nacelles. Apparently, I'd have to go back and find a picture of it, but it looked cool. When it first encountered the space-time rift and so forth. I think, to Ursa Master's point, I think the reintroduction of characters that we just left, thinking that they were all going to be together on the Lost Cerna and all that, it was a little jarring because it's like, oh, well, Soji and Agnes are on a diplomatic mission, and Rios is now back in Starfleet and commanding a ship, and Eleanor's a Starfleet graduate, and he's going to be on the Excelsior with Rafi. I mean, so you're kind of like whiplash, like keeping track. Well, wait, what's everybody do? But that they pretty much worked those kinks out by the end of the first episode, and then by the second episode, we're knee deep in this alternate reality, ending on a cliffhanger with Picard and the team being faced down by the magistrate and his security guards. I also want to touch upon Annie Wershing, who recently passed. I think we acknowledged it in one of our prior episodes when she actually passed. But she was, the new Borg Queen. And you might clear this up for me, the non-canon person. Alice Creech in First Contact, we saw what happened to her. And I know that the character made an appearance, I did not see the episode, at the end of Voyager. In fact, Alice Creech, I believe, replayed her role. So I guess I'm just, to the casual viewer, perhaps...
It was a different Borg Queen.
It is a different
Voyager,
Borg Queen.
But...
Okay, that's all I was trying to clear up, was that... Okay, that's fine.
Annie played the third iteration of the Borg Queen, and we'll talk more about it next week, but I think she absolutely nailed that part. Obviously, First Contact, that Borg Queen is iconic, but for what we needed to see in this season, may she rest in peace, because she absolutely championed that role and did a lot with a character that is, let's say, restricted for most of the season. So,
right.
Yeah.
And did you ever
I think
for a Borg Queen, as you say, sort of when we're first introduced to her, this is not someone of power and influence. This is, they're in wretched shape.
It's amazing to see. Yeah, it's amazing to see a timeline where Gul Dukat's skull kind of makes you feel bad. For those of us who watch DS9, there were certainly moments throughout the series where you were kind of thinking, is he gonna make a face turn? Are we gonna see a face Gul Dukat? And of course, no spoilers, but he doesn't. And so that one didn't make me feel too bad. Seeing the Grand Nagus' skull kind of made me feel bad. But to see the Borg Queen reduced to, just a shell. Like, the Borg are these great villains, and it's like, are they really going to do this to the Borg? Is this going to be the end of the Borg story? And, like I said, front-loading in Season 2 is a big deal, because a lot happens, even though it seems like not a lot is happening. And that's, again, I go back to the writers being absolutely brilliant in this series, but certainly in Season 2, they have really caught their stride. And now, knowing what we know about how it carries forward to Season 3,
right.
I highly anticipate that to continue. But the one thing I will say is I'm a little sad that there's not going to be another Q episode. I'm sort of holding out hope, and I know it's probably folly, but I'm sort of holding out hope that in the last episode of Picard, I don't know what's going to happen. Picard's on his deathbed. It's at his funeral. He's looking down at himself, and standing next to him is Q saying, look, there's all kinds of different paths to the Q continuum. I feel like that would be such a wonderful ending. If it was him, Data, and Q just walking off to the continuum to go be Qs together. It's probably not going to be how they end it. It seems a little Ant-Man and Thanos' butt, but, a fan can dream.
Oh, yeah. That would almost be like a Obi-Wan, Anakin, Yoda ending, in a sense.
Intriguing.
Well, I'm right there. Kelly out. I mean, come on. That was perfect. It's a great comparison.
I loved in episode 2, because we kind of get Q at the end of 1, and then episode 2, he gets to take center stage for a little while. I love how episodes with him where he can just snap his fingers and suddenly we're in a different setting or a different part of the galaxy or a different... And, I missed that. That was one of my favorite things of the series finale, All Good Things. I love being able... And, Picard is getting more and more exasperated, like, I'm tired of this bullshit, Q. In fact, I think that's one of the first times Picard says a PG-13 word and says, I'm sick of it. Tell me what we're doing here, or, get out.
Yeah.
And I think, I always like the way that, and they can't, if you had this omnipotent figure that could just erase history and, with the blink of an eye, obviously, the rules are so stacked against that, you're undercutting basic drama. But I get a thrill of seeing, Picard and him, saying like, well, here we are here, but wait, go look over here, like that. And the structure of it, of a Q episode and his guided tour, I think is really good there. All right, so yes, so next episode, we'll get into the meat, not just the sizzle, but the steak of season 2 and what's at stake as we bridge our way to reunion, which is the theme of season 3, in which, if you've been paying attention, sounds like there's a few of those in store as well. So, but for now, our crew is in peril.
Maybe more than we know about.
Right.
Yes.
Our crew is in peril, and we'll hopefully see them safe and secure. They have to go back to 2024 Los Angeles in order to set the future right there. So that's where we are. So I think we can probably warp core the entire season of season 1 right now. It's a little premature to start talking 2 yet, but I think.
Yeah, let's do it. Lord Uther?
Oh, for season 1? Oh, man. I'll go 6 out of 7 warp cores. Because it's going to get me season 2 and 3. Otherwise, I would have went 5. So 6 out of 7.
I'm going to go with Uther on this one as well. 6 out of 7 warp cores. Had there not been a season 2, I probably would have been more in the 5. I blame that on Rios pretty squarely. I liked the rest of the cast of season 1. Anytime there's somebody smoking a cigar in the future, I lose a lot of passion for what I'm watching. And
brazenly
if it weren't
smoking.
for the other Rios characters, if it wasn't for the other characters, I would not have liked the other Rios characters, I should say. I would not have liked him at all. But he becomes very likable, and I would also venture a little bit that Elnor was kind of annoying. At the end of the season, he does come around, and I like him quite a bit more. But we'll talk more about Elnor in season 2, I'm sure. But I think those two characters were fairly weak in season 1 and almost a little convenient, which feels a little forced for Star Trek when you have so many established TNG characters you could draw from the pool with. But solid 6 for me, knowing that season 2 comes up And again, I feel that season 2 is the best season of any Star Trek show ever produced.
That is a high bar. I'm going to go with 6. I think there were flashes of 7. Like I say, I think my favorite episode is episode 7, just reuniting with the Rikers out in, the woods in a cabin, and just taking a breath from Romulan conspiracies and existential, angst, and just allowing these well-lived-in characters the chance to feel joy when they see each other. I mean, that really came through, even though obviously, the actors have been waiting around all morning to get the shots. But when Counselor Troy comes down the deck and embraces Picard, and when Will is in his workshop listening to jazz, and, Picard is here. What did you say? And then his, Will. And then they sort of share a look. I mean, it's as bromancy as it gets. And again, you feel the affection not just for the characters, but for the actors who played them. There's no George Takei, William Shatner tension they have to sort of gloss over. These guys like working with each other. They've come up through the ranks together, and it really translates. I think episode 7 is probably my favorite of the 10 that were there. But I'd give it a solid 6. It was a little late to the party on its overarching theme, but it's a theme that Star Trek could not ignore and should not have ignored. And it provided, I think, sort of the answer to Nemesis for some fans, as in, here is the Data goodbye we needed, and here is, the being able to sort of launch pad out into new stories and new directions. So.
Love it. Love it. With that, we have gone boldly through Picard Season 1. Into Picard Season 2, we venture further with this hodgepodge cast of characters and some very titillating, exciting, unique story arcs that we'll be seeing soon. I can't wait to talk about. And as my camera goes out of focus, I wrap us back to We Are the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. That is Lord Uther. With us, as always, is Coach, and or whatever name he chooses that week. We appreciate you coming along with us into this journey on our deep space mission to explore all things Star Trek, from TOS to Picard and beyond. Well, maybe not beyond.
Is that what you
Thanks
did?
again for listening, and we will see you next week.